I am always so happy to be with you all. I I don't know when or if we're ever going to get to be in person again, and I do miss that. But the beauty of this is people that aren't even local anymore can still be with us, and that's a great joy and a gift. So I told Neil if I had written the daily word for my message today, it would have been the one that's for today. That that Jane read. Divine guidance clears and lights my way. In times of uncertainty, I turn within, pray, and enter the silence where I can better discern that still small voice within me. Then I relax and listen deeply to my soul's calling. I want to talk today about grief. Anybody who's been awake knows that this entire world seems to be in a state of grief. It doesn't matter where you turn. It doesn't matter what topic you choose. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's just unending between climate challenges, floodings, fires, droughts, wars, horrible violence forced upon innocent people. Massive species of animals and creatures and plants are dying at an unheralded rate. People of all faiths are being persecuted. People of all races are being persecuted. It just doesn't end. It just doesn't seem to end. And and you know me well enough to know that I'm going to turn to the scriptures. And when I think about the massive inequities and pain and suffering in our world, I can't address everything. And you're so grateful, or we'd be here till next Sunday. Not that I have the wisdom to address everything, but I'm going to address a couple of particular reactions or emotions that may be very common to us when we hear about some of these things. So I'm going to give you some scriptural background on a couple of people from the Christian scriptures. And I'm certain you've heard of these people, but maybe I can give you a little different perspective. And the first is a couple of sisters and their brother, Martha and Mary. Not to be, there's lots of Marys, so just think this is one Mary. This isn't all of the Marys. They didn't have last names. We have to just go with what we got. Martha and Mary were sisters, and they had a beloved brother named Lazarus. Also, not to be confused with a different Lazarus that was in one of the parables. So, Martha and Mary and Lazarus, um, as far as we can tell, none of the three of them were married, and they apparently lived together, and they had been very close siblings, and they were all three of them were very dear friends of Jesus's, which is saying something, because he was traveling all over the place, and he was frequently criticized for what he believed and what he taught and what he did. And he had to be careful, as some people do, because he was so outspoken and he was so radical. He's still radical. Don't ever forget that. The gospel of Christ is still radical. Anyway, Mary and Martha and Lazarus were very dear friends of Jesus. And one day when he was in Jerusalem doing, we don't know what, but he frequently was in Jerusalem doing teaching and learning and so forth, which was only a few miles from where Martha and Mary lived. And remember, Jesus was used to walking all over the countryside with his disciples. So a 3 or 4 5 mile walk was nothing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I haven't walked 5 miles in a row in a while. But it was not anything for him. So one day Jesus was with some of his disciples in Jerusalem, and he got a message by somebody. No computer, no cell phone. I mean, how did they do it? No telephone, no telegraph. He got a message that his dear friend Lazarus was dying. Now, this is the really curious part of this story. Actually, it's disturbing when you think about it. Jesus knew that his dear friend was dying. He knew that his dear friends, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, were suffering. And the message was begging Jesus to come to Bethany because they believed that Jesus could heal Lazarus. He'd done it before with people that were dying. So, of course, they believed that this man who was one of their closest friends would immediately rush to Bethany and bring healing to their friend, their brother. And you know what? He didn't do it. He didn't do it. He stayed where he was. 4 days later, Lazarus had died. 4 days later, Jesus shows up. Can you even begin to imagine the anguish, the anger, the sense of betrayal that Mary and Martha must have felt? Now, that word isn't used in the scriptures for this passage, but betrayal seems to me like one of the primary emotions that they must have felt. And and there are many situations in the world today, and I'm sure for some of us in our own personal lives, and certainly I can identify with this in certain times in my life when I have felt betrayed by somebody I really trusted. And sometimes I feel betrayed by situations in the world and in our country. And when Jesus finally got there, Mary said, Jesus, why did you wait so long? Don't you love us? Don't you love Lazarus? We trusted you. Where were you? And perhaps you can think of a time in your own life when you've had that experience on a very personal level. I can. And it's heartbreaking, and it's anguish causing. And Jesus' answer wasn't very satisfying. He said, you just don't understand what I'm about, or something like that. Wow. So then he says to one of the sisters, take me to where Lazarus is buried. And the sister said, why? Why would we do that? Why do you even care? You weren't here. You could have prevented this. He's dead. Jesus insisted. So they took Jesus to the cave where the body would have been buried, with a big stone in front. Remember, they always put a stone in front of a burial site. Partly that was to keep the wild animals out, to protect the body. Partly that was to keep grave robbers out, which was common. And this is indelicate, but partly was because the body would be smelling to high heaven. So they got to the space, the cave, And Jesus said to some people there, help us move the stone in front of the cave. Now, this sort of sounds like another burial we remember around Easter time, and it's a similar sort of story. And they moved the stone, and one of the sisters was just horrified. Said, Jesus, what are you doing? His body is going to stink. He's dead. Why are you disturbing him? And Jesus apparently calls out to Lazarus, and like some sort of unbelievable science fiction movie, this corpse wrapped up in cloths with some sort of a rag around his head and his eyes comes coming out of the cave, and he's not dead anymore. Metaphysically, perhaps that we can identify with that image, that there's a part of our lives, our memories, our relationships that has felt so much like a betrayal, and something happened that you can't explain, some insight that you received, some conversation, some image that helped you understand it differently. And you were somehow able, maybe, to let go of some of that betrayal and understand that there was a bigger message that you never would have gotten had you not experienced that. I don't know if you can, I don't know if that speaks to you at all, but there's been so many times, I suspect, in all of our lives when something horrible has happened and we couldn't understand why, and we couldn't understand how to get through it, and then we understand. And I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying just pray about it and it'll go away. I would never say that. I think it's much more complicated than that. And I absolutely believe in praying about it. But I also understand that sometimes it may take years to understand why, to understand how there was something in the midst of that time that I needed to learn, that I wasn't ready to learn yet. So let me share with you another song that kind of speaks to me about this. And you may have heard it. It's in the Unity songbook. It's a very simple song. It's called Breathe Through Me. And the words are very simple. Breathe through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, breathe through me. Then the next verse is think through me. And the next verse is live through me. Breathe through me, breathe through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, breathe through me. Breathe through me, breathe through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, breathe through me. Think through me, think through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, think through me, think through me, think through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, think through me. Speak through me. Speak through me, speak through me. Oh, Oh, blessed Spirit, speak through me, speak through me, speak through me. Oh, blessed Spirit, speak through me. Now I want to take you to another, just one more, another aspect of grieving, mourning, the pain that is afflicting so many people and living beings in our world. Another Mary, Mary Magdalene. Magdalene was not her last name. We don't have last names in the scriptures. Mary was from a province called Magdala, and some reason the scripture writers decided to give us a more specific identifier for this woman named Mary. So she's been called forever Mary Magdalene, and more properly, Mary of Magdala. Now, what we know about Mary of Magdala, and we don't know much, but what we know is that she had at some point in her life been afflicted with some sort of horrible, either mental, emotional, or physical illness. We don't know what it was. The scripture just says she had 7 demons. So, perhaps she had a serious mental illness where she couldn't relate to people. And perhaps perhaps people were very frightened of her. As was the case in those days, if somebody had something like that, or say cerebral palsy or some sort of physical ailment, they were frequently accused of being devil possessed. And what a cruel and horrible thing. But people with many different kinds of afflictions were frequently demonized and isolated and abused. And unfortunately, that's still true in parts of our world. If you've seen those heartbreaking commercials about the Mercy ship, the hospital ship that tries to do surgeries on people that their limbs are all malformed or whatever, or people that have been born with a cleft palate and their mouths. I mean, there's a real problem with swallowing and speaking and eating and so forth, and not to mention how much ridicule people that have a cleft palate endure. But something had happened to Mary Magdalene that really isolated her from everybody, probably including her own family. And at some point, Jesus encountered her and healed her. And she never, ever forgot that. And she became one of his most loyal disciples. And frequently in our heritage, I hate to say, at least in a lot of traditional Christian heritage, we've not heard about the women disciples. There were many women disciples, and they were fabulous. And they are acknowledged, but not very often in the scriptures. Mary of Magdala became one of Jesus' most dedicated disciples. And here's the thing. They're treated as having been... I can't read the rest of your message, John. That's all right. Yeah, I understand. Mary of Magdala became one of Jesus's most devout disciples, and frequently in the scriptures when they talk about Jesus and who was present, she was there. But here's one that maybe you haven't thought about, or at least haven't thought about in this way. Remember the people, at least according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John makes one exception. At the crucifixion of Jesus, which I hate even talking about the crucifixion, but remember, crucifixions were absolutely commonplace in the Roman Empire. And they were just the most unimaginable, horrific torture ever devised. And the people that showed up to support Jesus, to let him know that he wasn't completely alone in this unbelievable anguish. The people that showed up were the women, a few of the women. They were all named Mary, of course. There was Mary, his mother. There was, we think, Mary of the sisters Mary and Martha. We don't know for sure. And there was Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene. We know they were there. And remember, they put themselves in physical danger by being there. This was no small commitment to show up at the crucifixion of a loved one. The folks in the Roman Empire, and this is not to be confused with current day Rome, it's not to be confused with Roman Catholic. It was a completely different time and place. So just when you hear Rome, don't just remember it was a completely different time, and it was a time of great political divisiveness and retribution. Mary Magdalene, Mary of Magdala, was there at the cross. And he died. They watched and listened to the anguished cries of at least two other men besides Jesus being crucified and tortured for hours. And all three men died. And the crosses were taken down, the bodies were taken down, and a very kind, wealthy man, according to the scriptures, donated one of his burial sites for his own family. He donated it so that this rabbi would have a place to be buried. And it was the Passover, which meant that the devout Jewish people couldn't go take care of a broken and bruised and bloodied body. So they waited 3 days. They went to the tomb where Jesus' body had been put. They were going to wash and clean up as much as possible his body, which, by the way, was no small or easy task. It would have been an awful task. But they went to the tomb, and Mary of Magdala, according to the Gospel of John, went in after somebody rolled the stone away. And Mary of Magdala went in, and Jesus' body wasn't there. Now, we've all heard this story. I expect all of us have heard this story. Jesus wasn't there. And depending on how you read the scriptures, there was an angel in the tomb that said, he's not here. Hold on to that space, because we frequently jump to the next part where Mary comes out of the tomb and she sees who she thinks is the gardener, and the gardener says her name, and she realizes it's the risen Christ. Don't jump there yet. Stay with me. She's gone in the tomb. The broken and battered body of her beloved friend Jesus, whom she actually saw die. Absolutely, he was dead. There was no doubt. His body isn't there. And the scriptures don't call this fear or anger, but this is what I think had to have been in her heart. The body is there. The first thought one would have had at that point was somebody stole the body of my loved one, because it was not uncommon. Remember, I said grave robbery was not uncommon. Somebody stole the body of my loved one. I think she was afraid, and I think she was angry. Who could do this? And the scriptures don't stop there. They never stop there, but I just want us to stop there today for a few minutes and think about those emotions that just can't. I just think she must have felt for a while. Fear and anger. And it also says she wept. Go back to our current world, our current situation. I mean, I don't know. Don't we all feel that about so many things that are going on today? Fear, what's going to happen? And anger, how could this have happened? What can I do about it? How do we ever get through this? How do we ever find a way forward that's not so filled with hate and destruction and despair? And the answer to that, we know the answers. How do we get through sense of betrayal? How do we get through fear and anger that literally makes our blood just boil? How do we get through those? Do any of you know the works or the life of Howard Thurman? Let me tell you a little bit about this man. Can you see that? I've had this book and another one of his books. He wrote many, many books. And I've had his book and others of his books for several years. And I just decided I didn't even know any of his background. I mean, I knew that he had died, I believe, in 1981. He was born in 1900, born into poverty. And he became one of the most remarkable proponents of civil rights of our country. He became a good friend of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was a major source of influence for him. He personally, with his wife, went to India and met with Gandhi to learn about Gandhi's work. He became the dean and the professor of Spelman College, Howard University, and another major historically black university that escapes me right this minute. And he wrote all these books. And I wanted to share just a little portion of one of these meditations from this book. And he used a small phrase from a hymn that I grew up with, but I never paid attention to this phrase. And the hymn was Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Does anybody know it? Spirit of God, descend upon. It's a lovely hymn. In one of the verses, there's this phrase: teach me the patience of unanswered prayer. That's a startling statement. Teach me the patience of unanswered prayer. And I think that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about emotions that are so deep, and they're not just individuals' emotions. They're just filter through all of society and all the societies in the world. The emotions are so deep and so painful and feel so hopeless. Teach me the patience of unanswered prayer, like when we've been betrayed by someone we trusted, when we've been angered by events that seem so cruel and unimaginable, when we've been so afraid we literally couldn't move. Teach me the patience of unanswered prayer. And why? Why is it that we can pray so hard for so long about something and it feels as if we don't ever get any resolution? This is what Howard Thurman says. I'm just going to read you a little bit because it's so beautifully stated. The general overtones of anguish created by the unfulfilled need of this, we know something needs to change and we know we just don't know what. Send the soul searching for some clue, some key to unlock the door. But despite all the meaning of the possible clues, this is his phrase, the persistent hunger works deep within. Persistent hunger of unanswered prayer. Slowly it may dawn upon the spirit that there is a special ministry of unfulfillment. Listen, a ministry of unfulfillment. The patience of unanswered prayer, that just really struck me in a way that I've not ever felt before about this. So many things about which we pray that are causing us immense suffering and anxiety and questions. And we keep praying about them and they don't seem to change. And sometimes we just give up. And I know a lot of people in our world have probably given up. But this unfulfilled ministry, he calls it. It seems like an odd thing to say. Sometimes our prayers are not answered because it wasn't the time. It wasn't the right time. We weren't ready. We were not ready for the answer. And I can point to some times in my life when I just begged for a particular event, a particular resolution, and it just felt like nothing. And then eventually I realized I wasn't ready. I didn't have what I needed. I didn't know what I needed. I had to learn some more things. There were other relationships, there were other events in my life that had to happen to help me make the picture make sense. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And Howard Thurman calls it a ministry of unfulfillment. And I know that must sound so frustrating and so much what I don't want to know. But I think there's some fabulous truth to this. Because really, there are certain times in our lives and in our society and in our world when if the right puzzle piece had shown up, like, say, for example, Jesus of Nazareth, when he showed up, people didn't know how to respond. They weren't ready. And we're still dealing with that, whether it's about the Christ or any other major spiritual tradition in our world. We're still still dealing with not understanding, like the disciples didn't understand. So that calling, part of our calling as holy people is to not give up and to keep trusting. I don't know how this is going to be worked out. I don't know what my role in it is. I don't understand why it's happened. But my participation is to continue believing that holiness will eventually resolve this in the best way. Let me sing one more song for you. Flow, Spirit, flow, and all my fears release. I am a channel for thy perfect peace. Fill me with power, and let my heart be strong. Fill me with joy that I may sing thy song. Amen. Thank you.